Wise guys, Beatles and Brandy Alexandras. Welcome to the Tainted Tavern.
Welcome to the Tainted Tavern. Come sit inside for free.
Let me tell you one of the most amazing John Lennon stories there ever is. Now, it all started back in 1969 at Abbey Road Studios in London, where the Beatles famously recorded most of their work. The Beatles were working on what would be their last album, though it wasn't their last released album, but it was their last recorded album, because they already had an album which would eventually become Let It Be in the can, but it hadn't been released. And so they were working on an album called Abbey Road, which actually was their last recorded album, but released just before Let It Be. And Abbey Road is considered by many to be the finest Beatle album ever recorded. And by default, if it is the finest Beatle album ever recorded, then it's the finest album ever recorded. Now, the first song on Abbey Road was a John Lennon composition called Come Together. And John Lennon used a lyric to start off this song, a lyric and a bit of a vibe really that carried on through the song, that came from the Chuck Berry song, You Can't Catch Me. The line in question is, here comes old flat top, he come grooving up slowly. That was the line. Anyway, bad luck would come that the copyright of You Can't Catch Me was owned by Morris Levy of Roulette Music. Morris Levy, of course, had ties to the Genovese crime family, to the Mafia, and he was known as something of a dodgy character. In fact, way after this story ends in the 1980s, Levy was eventually found guilty after an FBI investigation. They launched an investigation which lasted several years into mob involvement in the music industry, and Levy was sentenced to 10 years in prison. He of course appealed this and was allowed out on a massive bail while the appeal was going on. He lost the appeal, but before he could report to begin his sentence, he died of cancer. Morris Levy was a mobster. He was involved in the mob, and I've got my note here. The character in The Sopranos, Herb Rabkin, was very much based on Morris Levy. Now, what happened was, Morris Levy, who of course owned Big Seven Music, decided to sue Lennon, the Beatles, basically because of the use of the line, here comes old flat top, which I've mentioned in a previous video when I reviewed Deep Purple's album In Rock, with their first song Speed King, which created a collage of lines from classic rock and roll songs. It was just bad luck to Lennon that the copyright here was owned by Morris Levy. He saw pound signs, dollar signs, so he sued Lennon. Now, Lennon knew about Levy's mob connections, and so he decided to go and see his buddy Don Corleone to see if he could ask for his help. But Marlon Brando told Lennon, he said, lay off the acid, it's just a movie, I ain't no Don fucking Corleone, no fuck off you crazy Beatle. And so Lennon had to, he decided to settle out of court with Morris Levy, and what he agreed to would be to record 3 songs which were owned by Big Seven Music on an upcoming album, on his next album, which would mean that Levy would then bring in the royalties from that, and it would be a pretty big payoff for Levy and Big Seven Music. So that was settled. But the problem was that things weren't going well for Lennon this period, and he'd broken up with Yoko Ono and ran off to LA with a Yoko Ono approved girlfriend, May Pan, and he started partying. He was working on the album, which he decided was going to be an album of rock and roll classics. It would eventually become released as the John Lennon rock and roll album. And considering all the madness that went into making this album and all the behind the scenes stuff, such as the problems with Morris Levy and Big Seven Music, the vocal performances on here by Lennon are absolutely fantastic. So this is the album that eventually came out of all these troubles I am telling you about. So, as I say, Lennon had agreed to record 3 songs. which the copyright was owned by Big Seven Music, in effect Morris Levy, and in effect the mob. But Phil Spector was to produce. Lennon had decamped to LA with his new girlfriend, May Pang, a girlfriend who had purposely been chosen for him by Yoko Ono. That was a weird set of Yoko and John, which I can't understand to this day. I mean, I'm not one of them who just completely knocks Yoko. It's just, it was a weird relationship. John loved her though, and you know, who am I to judge? You know, and John Lennon was a much better man than I am. Anyway, so whilst in LA, John starts partying crazy. He starts hanging out with Harry Nilsson. Harry Nilsson, of course, is another genius, musical genius who we lost too young, but he was almost equal in the hell-raising stakes to John Lennon. You had Ringo Starr quite often hanging out with him. You had Keith Moon, Elton John on certain occasions. Mickey Dolenz of the Monkees was there a lot, and this group of people who came to be known as the Hollywood Vampires, they were partying day in, day out. Phil Spector was at the most of his drug abuse at that stage, and in the studio quite often he pulled out a gun and started shooting at the studio. It was a crazy, crazy time. Most famously, John and Harry Nilsson got thrown out of the Troubadour Club for heckling the Smothers Brothers doing a comeback gig. That was a very famous event, but the Lost Weekend was absolutely bananas. As I say, Lennon referred to it as this Lost Weekend, and it has become to be known as the Lost Weekend, but it actually went on for 18 months.
Phil's on a bender again, shooting up and shooting out. I'm wearing Tampax on my head, me and Harry too. Ain't none of us been to bed, that's why our eyes are red. Yeah, it's a lost weekend, days into weeks, into months. Yeah, it's a lost weekend.
Now, that Smothers Brothers event took place on March the 12th, 1974. In which Lennon and Harry Nilsson started heckling the Smothers Brothers from the audience, and they were really going over the top. They were shouting obscenities. They were wearing tampons that they taped to their heads. It was quite a crazy situation. At one point, the Smothers Brothers manager, Ken Fritz, came over and told him, "Shut up, I'll get out," to which time Lennon threw a drunken punch, and he was so drunk he missed. The bouncers then suddenly got involved. There were loads of celebrities at this event, and Paul Newman was there. Lots of top grade celebrities were there, witnessed this madness from Lennon and Harry Nilsson. They were thrown outside, and at that stage Lennon was still performing. His glasses had fallen off in the Troubadour Club where the event had taken place. And he punched out, he was lashing out, and apparently hit a young female photographer accidentally, and he had to pay compensation for that. It was just a crazy, crazy time. Now, shortly afterwards, Phil Spector crashed his car and went into a coma for a little period, so it stopped the sessions. And when he recovered, he ran away with the tapes, so the tapes had gone. Now, John Lennon then had started to sort of wind down from his Lost Weekend phase, and he went back into the studio to finish up an album which would eventually become known as Walls and Bridges, and I've got that here. I'll show you the CD of that. I've got this on vinyl as well, but there's the CD there, and this is an absolutely fantastic Lennon solo album. Lennon went into the studio and recorded that, and right at the end, Morris Levy now was breathing down his neck because he hadn't provided this rock and roll album he promised. And right at the end of the album, Lennon with his 11-year-old son, 11-year-old at the time, Julian, playing on a Congo drum, just bashing away on the drum. The kid wasn't a musician this time, he just enjoyed himself basically. But Lennon used this and said, so they recorded the song Waiting in the La La, which was one of Morris Levy's own songs. So there was only a short snippet of that song, but Lennon said, and you can hear it on the record, he says, "Okay, let's do La La, let's get this one out of the way." Morris Levy was absolutely furious at this. Lennon had a pet mouse at home in Dakota called Elvis, and Morris Levy reportedly was absolutely fuming, and he wanted a load of wise guys to break into Lennon's place and decapitate this pet mouse and put the mouse's head in Lennon. I might be confusing that with a movie I've watched, I'm not sure. But an interesting story about Lennon's pet mouse, Elvis. It later died, sadly. It was caught in a trap. But anyway, Levy started breathing down Lennon's back. He wasn't happy with this recording of waiting, sitting in the yaya on walls and bridges, and so Lennon arranged to meet Morris Levy. And at this stage, Capitol had managed to get the tapes of the rock and roll sessions back from Phil Spector. They had to pay quite an hefty ransom to get these tapes back, but they got the tapes back. And so, as a show of good faith, Lennon gave Morris Levy a copy of these tapes and said, look, I'm working on the album, it won't be long, we'll have it out very soon now, I've just got to polish it up a bit. Here are the rough tapes, you can listen to them, you can see what we're working on. So he gave a copy of the rough tapes to Morris Levy. But Morris Levy, being a rather unscrupulous man, he was a mobster after all, when all is said and done, he bootlegged these tapes and made his own album called Roots and Roll Classics, and he started advertising it on the TV and selling it by mail order, which made...
Yes, you get 15 great hits in one fabulous record album for just $4.98. Hear John Lennon sing Ain't That a Shame. Slippin' and a Slidin'.
The records go absolutely bananas. They then had to rush out the actual rock and roll album, the cover of which I showed you of them is. They had to rush out the actual rock and roll album in order to compete with Levy's bootleg version called Roots. And Levy had the audacity then to sue Lennon and Capitol Records because he claimed that Lennon had given him the tapes on the understanding that Levy could do with what he wanted with them. He could market them, he could sell them, he could put them on the market. And so they went to court. Now, in 1976, Lennon and Capitol had already countersued, and the case finally came to court, and the court found it in the favour of Capitol and John Lennon, and Levy was ordered to pay, Levy, this not-so-wise guy, was ordered to pay $140,000 in damages to Lennon and Capitol, which these days would work out at $700,000. So the story more or less ended there. Levy went away with his tail between his legs, and Lennon, this Beatle, had stood up to powerful mob connections. The fact that he was a Beatle probably saved him. If he had been a lesser artist, then maybe the mob would have even put an hit on Lennon at this stage, but Lennon didn't. He got away with it. He was a Beatle. You couldn't just wipe out a Beatle. Well, not unless you was an insane fucker who just the jerk of all jerks. I'm not going to mention his name. Anyway, as I say, in the 1980s, the FBI launched an investigation against Mafia involvement in the music industry, and this investigation went on for several years, and Levy was eventually indicted and charged with extortion. But he appealed against this. He was allowed out on a massive bail, and he died of cancer before he was able to start. He lost his appeal, and he was given a date to report to prison, report to jail to start his 10-year sentence. But he died of cancer shortly before he could arrive in jail, so he didn't do any time. But it's a really interesting story of the way the music industry had involvement by organised crime, and John Lennon was there at the heart of it, even if he couldn't remember much of it because he was going through his Lost Weekend period. But we did get two really cool albums out of the Lost Weekend period, Walls and Bridges and the Rock and Roll album. The Rock and Roll album is very raw, it's very straightforward, raw album, and if Capitol hadn't had to rush release this, they probably would have polished it a lot more, but they had to compete with Levy's bootleg Lennon album Roots. But it's a fantastic album. Lennon's vocal performances on this, drunk or not, Brandy Alexandra's aside, was absolutely superb. So anyway, thanks for watching. Please leave a comment down below in the comment area. Give this video a thumbs up, and if you haven't done so already, then please subscribe to this channel. It doesn't cost you anything, and it will help the channel grow. So that's it for now. Cheers, Yakida. Thank you for watching the Tainted Tavern.
Come back soon.